Donald Trump announced that he will pardon January 6 defendants within the first 9 minutes of his presidency, following through on one of his major campaign promises. Here to break this all down for us is Blaze News editor-in-chief Matthew Peterson, Blaze News investigative journalist Steve Baker, and former Assistant Secretary of the Army during the Trump years, Colonel Casey Wardynski. And so, Steve, I want to start with you because obviously you're the one that we know that is personally affected by all of this news of pardons. And I know you happened to be over on Sarah Gonzalez's show yesterday, and you and Logan and Sarah were talking just about all of this news. So what was your initial reaction, and kind of now that you've had a day to think about this, what's this like to hear this?
I was initially emotionally impacted by it, as you might imagine. In fact, if we had not gone to a break when we did, and if she had just reeled it in a little bit more, she would have probably been able to elicit some tears, because I had not heard this statement yet, because this is the most clear and concise statement that the president-elect has made up to this point. In fact, when he was on Meet the Press Sunday, he was not nearly as clear and specific as he was in the Time magazine story.
Well, that's good news, and we look forward to seeing it actually happen. We need to see it actually happen, but it looks pretty good, so we're all excited about that. There is so much news right now when it comes to January 6th. A lot of the work that Steve and Joe and others have been doing sort of all coming to fruition. And we have a very special guest, obviously, with us here today. We really need to talk about the refusal to deploy the National Guard. And Steve, could you just kind of set that up with our audience?
Yeah, one of the most confusing things and one of the most controversial aspects of January 6th has been this whole matter of, did Trump actually order, or did he suggest, or did he give any kind of directive for the National Guard to be deployed that day? And of course, we have known for a long time through personal testimonies from characters like Kash Patel and others that yes, those directives were given, but why they were ignored or otherwise squashed hadn't been known to us. Until actually I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Wardynski, and I want to take the occasion to apologize for calling him Stacy Wardynski the last time we talked about this article, but it is Casey Wardynski. And what we were able to learn, and what we wrote a story about through Blaze Media, was the fact that, well, I'll let the good doctor get into that himself, but you were on the teleconference call where the actual phrase, "we don't like the optics," was first harvested.
That's right, Steve. And usually I just go by W. It's easier on everybody. January 6th, most of us that were presidential appointees had already signed our resignations. It's effective on the day of the inauguration at noon. We were cleaning out our desks. There was very few people in the Pentagon, of course, because this is COVID timeframe. And so I'd guess maybe 20% of the people that work in that building were in that building. Quiet day. We knew the inauguration was coming. The Army runs that. The Army Guard plays a key role. So I had been over to visit with General Walker and his team several times at the D.C. Guard, but wasn't expecting any big drama on the 6th. And my deputy, who had oversight over the Guard and Reserve affairs for the Army, Gene Collins, walked in and said, can I use the VTC machine in Mr. Williams' office? It's a secure VTC and something's going on at the Capitol. And I said, sure. And then I wandered down there, and a few minutes later, after he had it running, and what I saw was nothing I expected to see. It was the senior military leadership of the Department of the Army. So you had the Chief of Staff, General McConville, you had the operating officer, General Flynn, and you had General Pyatt, the Director of the Army Staff. And on the other end was General Walker, who commanded the D.C. Guard. Now, the D.C. Guard's a special outfit. It's under presidential control. There is no governor in D.C., and this Guard, the president nominates the commander, and I think he had been a DEA agent. He wasn't even an Army guy. When you get confirmed, you put on the 2 stars and you run the D.C. Guard. And in my view, it was the last line of defense, really, on the ground in terms of surveying control of the United States military. And so it had a special chain of command: President, SecDef, SecArmy. They had done a lot of changes to arrange the chain of command and the authorities at each level, but ultimately Secretary McCarthy, Secretary of the Army, was the guy to give the orders. And he's not on the call. And I've got these three generals, some of which strike me as being very diligent and professional, and one in particular who struck me as being very partisan, and that was General McConville. He had twice told me that he was not obeying illegal orders from the President of the United States. Now, he and I both went to the same trade school up at West Point, and that never would have dawned on me, no matter who the President of the United States was, to come up with a statement like that to a principal official of the United States government appointed by the President of the United States. The first time I let it go, it was during the riots in June, and I just wrote it off to a bad day. The second time was weeks before the election, and that one led me to meet with my lawyer, the number 3 lawyer in the General Counsel office, and to state, I'm going to tell you something I never expected to say in my entire career in the Army, which is I'm worried about mutiny. I'm worried about sedition. I think if the President wins the election, there will be an uprising and great difficulty. The President may be compelled to implement the Insurrection Act. They will claim it's a coup, and they will call that a legal order, and they will stand in the President's way to bring civil affairs back into the course of operation of communities across the country. What I didn't realize was they just waited till January 6th. In my view, this would have been brewing all the way from the beginning of COVID through the riots, growing insolence among senior leaders, General Milley being the top of the pack, who I work with pretty often, General McConville, who was one of his fellow travelers, and then some of these other folks at the top of the Army. January 6th, here they are, calling the shots on deployment of the Guard, and they don't like the optics of the United States Army Guard being involved at the Capitol. It made no sense to me, particularly because in the background, there are people behind the VTC saying, hey, the Virginia Guard is on its way, and the Maryland Guard's on its way. And of course, the question is, who invited them? Who are they going to report to, and what are they bringing? Very military sort of questions. The Army's coming, apparently. But unfortunately, the D.C. Guard, which is the part of the Army that's trained and prepared to help in this situation, is not coming because we don't like the optics in the uniform part of the Army. And optics were always at the bottom of any discussion about why we shouldn't do something. We don't want to be near Trump. We don't like the optics with the trip to the church. We go to West Point for graduation. We don't like the optics. The cadets are going to mutiny against the president because they're afraid of COVID. And of course, it was a wonderful day and a great day. And the chief of staff tells me, I'm not going to be a prop for the president when the cadets have an uprising. I mean, this is nothing anybody would expect from our military. And that was my experience on January 6th. And of course, the rest is history. The Guard did not get to go.
So on January 6th, you were Assistant Secretary, right?
Of the Army.
Yeah, of the Army. And a report just came out this week talking about how there were 26, I believe, sources, right, FBI sources there that day. Do you have any thoughts about that report and about the FBI and who was or wasn't there that day?
Well, we've had time to think about it for 4 years, and we've watched the way they've persecuted these Americans who, many were nonviolent, many were at the Capitol for a rally that was a patriotic event. They lost control of it because there was not enough folks on the ground there. They've spent years rotting in jail. And I've come to the conclusion that this was an extension of the behavior that we saw in the summer of 20, extending through the election. And it was a behavior that was purely operating against President Trump at every turn. He could not be trusted. We had to watch out for him. We had to worry about the Insurrection Act. We had to worry about his speech at West Point. It's not beyond the pale that there were provocateurs in that crowd. Whether they're FBI or who put them there, I don't know. But I'm willing to entertain that, and I think it needs to be looked into in detail.
Stephen, your take on the 26, as they call them, sources. Don't call them agents by any means, because then they'll say, oh, no, everything's a lie. But we know now 26 FBI sources that day.
Yeah, the confidential human sources. And it has to be very clearly differentiated between what the difference is between a CHS and an actual special agent, FBI agent, and an undercover agent. Now, many of the people online, particularly the clickbaiters, those who are making their bones by rage porn and that sort of thing, are conflating these CHSs to being undercover agents. And that's just nothing could be further from the truth. If we're talking about an actual undercover FBI agent, that is a special designation. That is a special deployment posture that they would be under. Now, if there were FBI agents there wearing the costume of MAGA hat, Trump scarves, that sort of thing, that might be insinuated as an undercover agent. But most of the agents that were in the cloud, and I don't doubt that there were 200, maybe 300 actual agents in the crowd that day, but these are plain clothes anyway. They would have put on their winter coat and wandered down from the Hoover building to see what was going on. And there's nothing necessarily nefarious about that. What we don't yet have the kill shot on is who those provocateurs were, and whether or not they were part of the FBI or the DOD or anybody else is still not yet proven.
Yeah, if you want to read more about this, you should go to theblaze.com because that article is up. It is up on the website today, and it really questions the narrative we're hearing from friends of the FBI. Yesterday, we had young Will Tebow on talking about policy for the Department of Defense. And so today, we cannot let you go without telling us, having been there during the Trump years, having seen everything that's gone on, you must have some thoughts about directionally what needs to happen. Because, and I say this because I know that so many people in our audience are very concerned, right? I mean, every sensible American is very concerned about what's happened to the military. You just went into the worst of it with sort of seditious speech or behavior, perhaps, and then also the wokeness, the DEI stuff, and the weakness that we've seen in the military. I don't know how many people that I've talked to, if you actually give them an array of options to talk about what's really wrong with the country or what concerns them, this is one of the top things that concerns Americans. So how do we solve it?
Well, it worries me greatly. While the riots were going on and the country was focused on Minneapolis and burning cities, fire started in the Pentagon, and it came from West Point. I was at working my email, and I opened an email from somewhere. I think it was a cadet at West Point. And I started reading through this document, which I now call the West Point Manifesto. I'm a West Point graduate. I got 2 West Point graduates that I raised. This was nothing like I could ever believe could come out of West Point. West Point is systemically racist. The dean and the commandant must confess white privilege is how they got their jobs. And it went on from there to get worse. Now, I had been up there when I first got appointed to check on Cadet Rapone. You might remember we had a Marxist up there early on who opened his gray blazer and showed Che Guevara, and it took the Army a long time to get rid of that guy. And I flew up there to ask the superintendent, how can this happen? I was a cadet. You own these people 24 hours a day for 4 years. Nobody knew? And the discussion was this can never happen again. And now we've got the first captain, the top-ranking cadet, scholar students for Rhodes Scholars, various scholarships, captains of teams, the top of the Corps, writing this, each with their lived experience as the data. And I've got a jet. We got up there, and the dean was looking for new work by the time we were done. We had figured out quickly what was wrong at West Point. It was going to take them apparently quite some time to figure it out. And in a day, we figured out what was going on. It was the English department, the social sciences department, the history department, and behavioral sciences had an elective called inclusion, maybe equity and inclusion, right? Very few teaching hours for the people teaching us stuff, very few students, but it was these cadets. And, you saw Millie, right? He learned about white rage, right, on January 6th. BS. He said, we need to understand the enemy. That doesn't mean we're going to model them. These kids have been indoctrinated. They believed the stuff they were taught, and it was a direct threat to the security of this country. If West Pointers can't read the Constitution and understand it, and the 14th Amendment, that's a problem, especially the top of the Corps. And so this has got to be fixed from bottom to top, from West Point through the ranks, all the way to the Pentagon. Get rid of it and get back to what is great about our country.